So Bob emails, what do you say?
Yeah.
This email is from an anonymous middle tier patron. She is a professor in interpersonal communication. And she says, I had a student who disclosed that he was diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder. He actually disclosed this to the entire class during his introduction. He had a couple of interactions that made me uncomfortable. For example, he looked up my dissertation and wanted to talk about his opinions on it. He also frequently wanted to argue about research that wasn't relevant to the class. He also frequently talked over other students and interrupted to try and correct me during lectures or activities. So just chiming in here, what are your thoughts on that?
Sounds irritating, and also workable.
Yeah. If he does have narcissistic personality disorder, which is not necessarily the case, or at the very least, I wouldn't diagnose him with narcissistic personality, then, that's a possibility. But if he does, then he is someone who, because of the neglect he went through early in life, he defensively tries to take up more space because in a histrionic way, he gains more attention than he would otherwise. And he needs that attention. He needs acknowledgement that he's smart and superior so that he can feel safe, essentially. And so for him to sit still in a class and listen or appropriately interact with people, that's overwhelmed by his desire for narcissistic supply, because without it, he feels extremely inferior, as if he's nothing and that he's going to be abandoned and harmed or something. So he has this compulsion to voice his opinions, to talk over other people. He also has this blind spot to other people's feelings because of the defensive structure. It's not a conscious choice. So the fact that he said, hey, my name is Mike, and I don't know if that's his name, but my name is Mike and I have narcissistic personality disorder, is a lot better than if he hadn't said something, Now, there's another possibility that he's like, I have narcissistic personality disorder, so that gives me full license to be a dick to everyone around me.
No.
Who knows where he's coming from.
Right.
But yeah, that would be annoying. I've had students like that,
Me
and
too.
It's no fun.
It is not fun.
Yeah. I mean, more broader, I pretty much in every class, there was at least one person. I mean, some of my smaller classes, not so much, but if it was a general, larger class, on average, there was one person that had some significant personality issue that was impacted me and or the rest of the class. There was always someone on, law of averages or something.
Yeah.
And narcissism would be one, but there were others. And it really, I think most professors understand that, or have the observation, like what I eventually realized, which is that 95% of my time as a professor was spent on 5% of the students.
Oh.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because there were so many students that just learned well, participated well, didn't require me to monitor them or to discipline them or to correct them or to deal with them.
Yeah.
They just learned and managed, whereas every once in a while, there's this other student that they just can't cope in a variety of ways, or they have a hard time learning or something.
Right.
Anyway, going on with the email. I have been teaching for 10 years, so these behaviors weren't new or too bothersome, but they were piling up in the first 2 weeks of class. One day after class, I was helping another student, and he was trying to lecture me about an article related to empathy and narcissistic personality disorder. I was a little overwhelmed and frustrated with trying to focus. I have adult ADHD, by the way.
Oh, man.
And I said, quote, I need just a minute before I can talk with you about this.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. He hung around silently for a few minutes and then left. He never returned to class and ultimately failed the class. I know there is something I could have done better with him, but I am at a loss as to what that is. Any thoughts or advice would be appreciated. Bob, what do you think?
I'm at a loss too. You have a job. Your job is not to facilitate a student's sense of well-being. You have a job to teach material in this class. And so it sounds to me like you're doing your job, and for for I can tell, doing it very well. And it might be that the dynamic there, had this coalition where it just coalescence. It just coalesced in him having a crisis and having to sort of drop out, maybe because of shame or something. And, who knows what's going on in other classes. This poor guy is really suffering, but it isn't your job, I don't think. I mean, I'm not a professor. I don't think this is your job, though, to ensure that every student passes. It's your job to teach the class, to do it reasonably well, to help out when you can, and sometimes students will fail.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say it's not your job to, sacrifice you and the rest of the class because one person has a
no way
personality disorder.
In fact, you have a duty to the rest of the class to
Right.
keep that shit down.
Right. You do have a duty to, within reason, attempt to help individual students when they are acting appropriately, but you don't have a duty to sacrifice you and the rest of the class. Because you're telling me one day after class you're helping another student and he was trying to interrupt by lecturing you about empathy and narcissistic personality disorder. Ironic, by the way, that's what he's talking about.
Yeah, it is very ironic.
And now I'm guessing that as you communicated to him, look, I just need a second before I can talk with you about this. I'm guessing that you said that with at least a little bit of tone, if not a lot of tone, which is understandable.
Yeah.
And yeah, it doesn't sound like you did anything that should have been different, but these are all learning situations. So the thing that you might be able to learn from this is to address these things up front earlier. Like you are noticing earlier on that he wants to talk with you about the dissertation. And, so one of the things that I found through my experience as a professor, and this was cobbled together and made more robust as an approach over my 25 years as a professor, that there were things that I would run into as problems as a professor in the middle of a course. And at in that particular course, that term, I wished that I would have said something at the beginning of the quarter to kind of set up an expectation so that when I have to enact a policy, I can say, remember when I talked about this?
Yeah, it's easier.
Yeah, because it provides more credibility and also tells the students, you're not the first person that I've had this issue with, and I have an approach. I'm not being arbitrarily like this with you. This is what I have learned is best for all students in this situation. It carries with it less personal attack and more of just dealing with the situation. Right. So I learned that, that along these lines, I would talk with students. Like one of the things that I would say up front in my family of origin class, which was a class for first quarter students, and there are many caveats that I learned I had to say, but one of them was, look, I don't really know any of you, and if I do know you, I barely know you, and I don't know how you will fare academically. But on average, one of you will fail this class, maybe more. It's not personal, and here are the reasons why you will fail if it will happen. And then I would lay out the reasons why. It was typically because they didn't understand the concepts or their writing wasn't up to graduate level yet.
Cool.
And there are many reasons for that. They haven't been in school for a while, or they're overwhelmed with life, or their traumas are being triggered too much and they're having difficulty managing it.
Right.
So, I would have a whole thing on that because inevitably about one out of 15 students would always fail on average. And when that happened, I would be reminding them, remember how I said in the beginning of class that if this, and this happens, then you'll fail the class. It's not personal. And now that's happening. And, and then what I would get from students then was, but I know that my paper is good. And so then I learned to have another caveat, which was for that person that fails because of the paper not being graduate level, 9 times out of 10, you will think that everything is fine and that I'm the crazy one. Mm-hmm. Well, let's look at that. I've been a professor for 25 years in this program teaching this class. This is the very first class I ever taught at the university in 1997. Which is more likely, that my standards are random and weird and you're a perfect writer, or I might know what I'm doing as a professor, not only in my class, but I'm trying to set you up for success in future classes, because if you can't write a graduate level paper in my class, because I actually help you a lot. I give you sample papers. I go over every line of what you're supposed to be doing in the paper. I give you a lot of instructions. I give you a chance to send me paragraphs over email, and I'll tell you if it looks okay or not. Other professors won't even come close to giving you that much help. If you can't write a graduate paper in my class, you are going to fail out of the whole program. So, and I give you a pathway to get better, and the university does too, because they have writing help and all that kind of stuff. So what's the more likely scenario? That you are a perfect writer and I'm an idiot, or I'm applying a fair assessment of you and your writing, and you're narcissistic about your writing? Like,
use that word?
I would, because it's fucking narcissistic. Like, get out of your own fucking head. Like, because it is, and there's many roads to narcissism, many roads to being defensively oppositional to negative feedback, But I didn't. But again, this is in the first class, so I don't know which one of you is going to be narcissistic in that way. But when it happens, I want you to think about this possibility. Okay,
it's good. It's good.
So
caveat:
when it would happen, I would say, so remember that time when at the beginning of class where I said 9 times out of 10 when I provide what I believe to be valid feedback as to why your paper is not at beyond the threshold to pass for this class. And I said 9 out of 10 of those students will think that I'm an idiot. I'm getting a vibe that you think I'm an idiot. Do you think I'm an idiot? Do you need more? Do you want a second opinion? Because I can get other professors to read your paper, and people that I won't tell the professor what to say, and we'll see what they say. Do you want me to do that?
Anybody ever take you up on that?
I think sometimes, yeah. Yeah. And the other professor sometimes would be harsher. They'd be like, they would tell me privately, this student needs to go. That kind of, because I was pretty. My policy was speak a big game, but be nice in the end. Yeah. So if I set up an intimidation, if I set up an expectation that I have boundaries, because I do, but when it came down to it, I did everything I possibly could to help someone and to make them successful. But if I did fail someone, I lost zero sleep, because I told them, and not only of the fact that because a lot of professors, 99 times out of 100, anecdotally, they don't even tell their students that you can fail a class. They just say, here are the expectations. But it's not explicit that if you don't do these things, I will fail you,
None of my teachers ever did.
Yeah. But that can and does happen and should happen,
Right.
So the fact that the professors avoid the topic altogether when it is one of the most primary fears of a student, it should just be explicitly laid out. Students would tell me that they would have a lot of reactions to it, and initially it would scare them, but then they'd realize, but I actually know the landscape, so that helps. Yeah. I'd rather know the landscape than wonder about the landscape,
right.
And I don't know, I just felt like it should be disclosed that way. Anyway, so you might learn, professor, patron, that in your next course, you tell people up front, you'd be like, hey, I have learned that I need to say this up front, that if you are someone that is going to talk a lot or talk over other people or interrupt people, or you want to monopolize my time, that's totally, it's not your fault if that's how you're oriented, or that's your desire, that's what you need. But I will tell you that you're going too far, or that I only have so much time, or I have to help other students. You are free to request that you want more of my time. And by the way, the vast majority of you'll never have a problem with that. If anything, the vast majority of you will be too intimidated to ask me questions. So I'm only talking to people that are generally over-talky and interrupty of a lot of people in their life. So if you're not one of those people, don't worry about it. But if you are, feel free to interrupt or talk over, but if it gets beyond a certain threshold, I will pull you aside and say, hey, I appreciate you, but let's try to work on how to restrain yourself or how to be more considerate of other people's feelings. I will say that to you, because I've learned through experience that if I don't say this up front to you all, when the time comes, it'll feel weirder. But if it does happen, I will say something. And here's the other thing. If I don't say something to you, that means you're fine. Because that was another thing that I said as a professor. Because, students, there was a student who would talk more than other students. There was sort of a bell curve. You had people in the middle who would talk infrequently, but at times. You had people at the other end of the bell curve who never talked, like ever, and they were terrified of talking. You had people at the other end of the bell curve who talked, and that's all they wanted to do. Not narcissistically, but they just had a lot of ideas, and if no one else was talking, they were like, well, someone should say something, and so they would start talking. And I appreciated the people who talked a lot because they were providing the class with material to mull over,
right.
And I also appreciated the people who didn't talk, because I'm one of those people when I'm in a class, and I hated it when professors pressured me or other students pressured me to talk, because I don't like talking in groups. I'm too shy, and I just don't. I don't know, and I don't feel like I have much to say, which is ironic because I'm constantly talking.
It is really funny.
Yeah, but and I would say that at the beginning of class, I would say, if you're one of those students who doesn't like to talk, you are under zero pressure. You could go the entire course without ever saying something in a discussion, and I will not think anything bad about you. So you have full license to be like me, because no professor ever did this for me. You have full license to just completely avoid talking in discussions for the rest of the quarter. That's fine.
I had a friend in school back then, and she said to me one day, yeah, I don't really talk much in class, and I didn't talk in this class at all the entire time, except one time the professor was referencing this Mickey Rourke movie, and I knew the title, and so I said it. Barfly. That's the only thing I said the entire time.
I used to be obsessed with that movie. And
Henry Janansky.
That's who directed it?
No, that's Charles Bukowski's film, but his character's Henry Janansky.
Oh, that's his character, yeah. Yeah, Bukowski. I feel like every young man of a certain ilk goes through an unfortunate Bukowski phase.
Yeah, that's true.
There was this book that someone gave me as a gift that I just remember reading and just being it was so, I don't know what it was about the book. It was so, it just had unbridled, horrible masculinity.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And just didn't give a shit about society. Like,
that is also true. Yeah.
He was such a dirtbag, and also unapologetic, and knew he was a dirtbag.
Mm-hmm.
He was like, I'm a dirtbag. I'm a horrible human being. Let me show you how I'm a horrible human being. And Barfly was a part of it.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure if I read the book today, I'd just be like, no, this book does not need to exist.
Yeah.
That's probably what I would think today.
Some kind of evolution.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
anyways, I interrupted because you were saying that there are students that don't talk, and that's perfectly fine.
Right. So the students that talk a lot, I appreciated because they gave us something to mull over, and all that's about halfway through the quarter, they would say something to me privately or in class that they apologize for always talking. And they're like, yeah, I feel like I'm taking up too much space. And I'd say, no. Like, if someone else has something to say, you always let them, you don't interrupt them. But if no one's saying anything, then you step into the space, which I have to say, as a professor, I appreciate. If you didn't exist, then this class would be very boring and not as effective even for the other students. So it's good that you say so. And the other thing I'd say is, I will tell you if you're talking too much. I am not shy about telling you if you're talking too fucking much. Mm-hmm. You are well below that threshold. But if you ever do go past that threshold, I will be the first person to tell you. I guarantee you, because I'm not afraid of telling people that.
Yeah.
So do you, and I will tell you when you're past the limit.
It's funny, when you're really clear about your boundaries, you can actually be very nice.
Yeah. That was my whole thing. It's like, here are my boundaries, and I will enact those boundaries.
Sure, let you know.
But if you're below those boundaries, then you know that you're below his boundaries. Yeah. So anyway, that's what I might do as a professor is just be upfront about that expectation. And then when you have to enact it, then you have a procedure. That's the thing that always bugs me about being a professor is that, or just being a human being. There's so many different things that we know are going to happen. Like with being a professor, there's so many things that are obvious.
Yeah.
Obviously, especially if you have enough students in your class, you're going to have someone with narcissistic personality disorder. So what's the protocol? And do you have a boss that at the university that walks you through these protocols? Here's what we do, or here are the various approaches. But so often in life, people just be like, it won't happen to me, or how come this is happening to me? It's like, of course it's happening to you. There are narcissistic people in the world, and some of them are going to sign up for your class,
right,
and they will annoy the fuck out of you. So what's the procedure?
Yeah.
Like, what are the steps?
Right.
The thing that really drove me nuts at my university was there's always a student that is of concern. There was always a student who was a concern to the whole program. Out of 300 students, there was always one or two that had some major problem academically or personality-wise, or as an intern, they would act in very unethical or harmful ways.
Yeah.
On average, you're going to have that. And every time that one of these students come around, as a faculty body, we would get together and talk about it, and everyone would be reacting emotionally, and there'd be no procedure. It was like every time we were reinventing the wheel, and it was always going poorly. Then I became program director, and I'm like, I enacted a lot of changes, but this was one of them. I'm like, we are not going to do this anymore.
Yeah.
We are going to develop a flow chart so that and you're responsible for doing these things every time.
Yeah.
We do it the same way.
That's good.
Every time. And here are the elements that I have found that are important, because there's so many things. You're trying to help the student.
Right.
You're trying to help the professors. You're trying to help the fellow students. They're also trying to avoid getting sued, which happens half the time. Right. And there's ways to avoid being sued, and there's ways to defend yourself.
Right.
Once the lawsuit is delivered. That involves consensus and procedure and documentation. And it's not hard, it doesn't add a lot of work. In fact, it lowers work because you're not constantly thinking, what do we do? What do we do? Oh my God, I'm so upset. I feel so angry. It's like, okay, let's have those feelings. Now let's do the procedure.
Yeah.
Because there's always going to be one of those students. So
you have an ethical responsibility to not graduate students who aren't up for it.
Right. And as a program director, I had an ethical responsibility to protect my professors from having to deal with this shit as if it never happened before.
Right.
It's constantly happening.
Right. Hey, when you think about it, 1 or 2 out of 300, your batting average is really good.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. And a lot of that had to do with screening at interview.
Yeah.
All right, let's take a break. We get back. More emails. What do you say?
Yeah.
All right, back from the break. Patron Katie
I
from...
had one final thought about they said that the student left and they never heard from them again, and the student ultimately failed. And the thing that stood out is, I don't know what your policy is, but maybe that would have been a time to reach out, and maybe not reaching out was a way to express anger or frustration, that you're like, okay, don't let the door hit you. I don't know if that's true. That might be something worth learning about. Like, what would you do with another student? Would you reach out? What's your policy? Mm-hmm. Because that's not a bad person. They might have some problematic behavior in a class, but they're not a bad person. And, they deserve as fair a shake as anybody else.
Yeah. We're taught culturally to believe that people with the label of narcissism, but even people with the traits of narcissism, that they are bad people that deserve our rejection, sort of thing. They interrupt. They might even be sexist towards women professors.
And they might actually be, but of course, sexism is everywhere.
Yeah. And you talk to a fellow professor or a friend, and they're going to say like, kick that person to the curb. That guy. And,
dismissive.
Yeah. Because especially if it's a man, I think it's people will conclude that person wakes up to be a jerk face and will always be a jerk face, but we know that people with narcissistic personality disorder and even people that are indoctrinated into gender superiority are, they're good people who have bad defenses, harmful defenses, and bad ideas that they've been brainwashed into believing. At the core, they are redeemable. But I don't know. Yes, could she have reached out? But if she were a colleague or a friend of mine, particularly because she's not in the therapy field, if she said, I kind of want to just avoid it, and if he never comes back, then good riddance, I would allow for that because, she did a lot as a professor even up to that point. And
you could see it as a self-selection.
Yeah.
Because the student wasn't booted.
Right. Yeah. And he wasn't suited perhaps for being in college, because if he can't handle that kind of situation,
right,
like a boundary, like it's even if she did have tone, it's normal that she would.
Oh, yeah. I don't have any problem with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if he can't handle that and he just like, I'm so hurt and angry, I'm going to never come back to that class again. Like, well, maybe you need to go to therapy before you go to college, because that's going to happen all the time. You know what I mean? That when you are annoying, people are going to be, and she wasn't even punitive.
No,
she was just a little like, hey,
yeah,
give me a break. I'm talking with someone right now.
Right.
If you can't handle that, then maybe more healing is in order before you actually expect yourself to be able to handle stuff like that.
See that?
Yeah. Anyway, patron Katie from Czech Republic, she says, "Hi, Kirk and Bob. First of all, I want to thank you for creating this podcast. Bob's advice to talk to my therapist about anything that's bothering me or I don't feel comfortable with about in therapy is really worth its weight in gold."
Oh, it's nice to hear.
Yeah, because usually
that's all I say.
Yeah, and some people will be like, "Yeah, and Bob, I've already talked with my therapist," and so it's great to hear.
Yeah, thank you,
Katie, that you appreciate that, because if it's manageable, it's a wonderful opportunity for so much understanding and safety and growth and changing the therapy to your needs.
Yeah, love it.
Going on. Anyway, I have a question concerning anxiety and fight or flight reaction. There's a thing that happens to me pretty much whenever I'm faced with some emotional, stressful situation or making a decision. I feel like my brain shuts down and I just can't think or decide or say anything. So she's saying when she has to make an emotional, stressful decision or situation, her brain shuts down. She can't do anything.
Right.
And the harder I think, and the harder I try to think, the worse it gets. Oh, yeah. And I start panicking, and because I think I should be saying something already, that it must look like I'm super stupid or have gone crazy or something. I figured that it must be related to anxiety and my low self-esteem, and that my brain goes into fight, flight, freeze mode and just doesn't let me think. I'm in individual therapy and group therapy, but most of my therapy is talking about my jealous spouse. Any idea what I may be dealing with? How do I fight it? I think learning more about this state might help me overcome it. Bob, what do you think?
Well, first off, your brain does what everybody's brain does when they're in fight, flight, freeze, is you freeze or you whatever, and you can't think. You don't have access to your prefrontal cortex, and the dust is definitely not settled, and that's normal. That's just the peeps. And the thing about you is you feel like as though you must perform anyways. And, 99 times out of 100, there's nothing we really have to do right now. So this happens to me pretty regular.
Really?
Not to this extent, but yeah. And I've just become very frank about it. Like at work, I'll be just like, I don't know what to do right now. And I'll just say, I'm not sure what to do right now. Does anybody have any advice for me?
So in that moment, you're having a adrenaline reaction.
Yeah.
And there would be without some sort of practice or skill, you might just shut down and not say anything?
That has happened to me, yeah, where I've shut down and not said anything, or sort of bumbled along or tried to say something even though I'm actually at that moment incapable or, not sure what, can't think.
Yeah.
And I've learned to be transparent about it. Just, I can't think right now.
Right.
I actually don't know what to do right now, or my heart rate's up. Anybody else's heart rate is up? I'll do that, you know? And oftentimes that's the case. It's like I'm just experiencing something that is happening with my couple or my client or whatever.
Right.
And I have a certain humility about it. Like I don't actually expect myself to be able to perform under all circumstance. I just am not capable of that. I don't think anybody is. Maybe if I have a strength, it's that I feel okay about being plain about that. And if I just wait, something will occur. But I literally have to do the waiting. Yeah. So
yeah,
and sometimes I'll say, I need a minute.
Right.
Guys, just give me a sec here. I need a minute.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so many therapists listening right now can benefit from hearing that.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't learn that until later in my career.
Me too.
And I still will struggle with it at times, but
which part do you struggle with?
well, with giving myself permission to ask for time.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and not feeling ashamed. You know, there's this idea, especially as a therapist, that you need to be constantly in the ball. And
yeah.
And what helped me was my mentoring of other therapists that would be talking about and having much more of this in the beginning of their career.
Right.
And I would say, you know, you could just say, my brain is going blank. Or even like if you lost track of what the client was saying, you know, it's okay to be like, I'm sorry, I kind of lost track of what you're saying. Can you start over again?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Maybe my brain just had a brain fart.
Yeah, I say that a lot.
Yeah. Another thing that I would tell people, I think particularly with I think I might even told you this with the Zoom therapy thing, is to be aware of your body and your spine, because it can take a toll being a therapist, but particularly when you're hunched over a laptop, right? And to stretch and to stand, you know, to just tell a client halfway through a session to be, you know, because I would have students that would be in, you know, we'd be in class and then, you know, they're trying to be respectful. And then they would just be like, can I stand? Because I'm in utter pain right now trying to sit for this long. And I would say, absolutely. And don't wait until you're in utter pain. Just as soon as you need to, stand up. And if you are with a client, do not sacrifice your spine on the altar of therapy.
Oh, yeah. That's
like,
a long life.
You can be a very effective therapist while occasionally standing and walking around. And you're not going to be of any use to people if you're, you know, bedridden in constant chronic pain. So, you know, take care of your body. Go to the bathroom. You know, that was another thing I would tell students was, when in doubt, even if you don't have to go to the bathroom, but you just need a couple seconds to think, just say, I'm sorry, I am having a bathroom emergency. I have to go to the bathroom. Yeah. Go to the bathroom, take a breath, and think, what's happening right now? You know, center yourself, and then go back into the session. Like, it's okay.
Just reset.
Yeah, people have to go to the bathroom sometimes. It's not a big deal.
Yeah.
So yeah. Now, for you, Katie, you say, how do I fight it? How do I deal with it? It's a very frequent kind of question, but that is not the right question, because fighting it or dealing with it is, depending on what you mean by dealing with, but and depending on what you mean by fighting with it, is not necessarily going to work. It's, you know, the typical thing is just like, I have to overcome this. I have to be able to handle this or something, and
unpanic myself.
Yeah, right. And not only not going to work, but will make it worse. That's what's causing the problem. In the moment, you're like, I need to overcome this fear of what's happening. I need to stop shutting down. That's going to cause you, as you point out with your awareness, that it causes you to be even worse. So,
is Katie a therapist? I can't remember.
No, I don't think so.
No, okay. This just happens in her life.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the answer is to have a procedure like what Bob is saying. Like, I'm guessing, you know, you're being pressured. People are like, hey, make a decision. And you get anxious. You start to shut down. And then you get worried. So if you pound this into your head while you're not being triggered, that the next time this happens, I'm going to say the following phrase. Because when you're having an adrenaline fight or flight reaction,
right,
your prefrontal cortex will be mostly offline, but not entirely. So, and your memory access will be mostly offline, but not entirely. So if you pound it into your head, it's why military folks are trained the way that they're trained.
Yeah.
Under stress, they have an automatic response.
Yeah.
They need to do this, they need to do this, and you don't need to think. You're not supposed to think. If you are in the military and you're thinking, there's a problem.
Yeah.
Like, you're already going to get killed by the enemy, because the enemy isn't thinking. The enemy
they're just moving,
is taking action, and you're just frozen. So you need to pound it into your head through repetition and practice and repetition and practice, so that when the time comes, you just do it automatically. Like with defensive driving, they'll teach you that. It's like, if you're thinking as you are, tail spinning or something, there needs to just be this automatic response. Like when this happens, boom, you just do this, that sort of thing. And so that's why, and this principle is in a lot of areas, not just this one, but like with me, when I've talked about this before, that I've pounded in my head sufficiently such that now when I get triggered by my wife and I go into the depths of my hurt and anger, and I'm saying all these super negative things about our marriage or about her, I have pounded it into my head enough that there's this access to this kind of distant feeling and memory that is basically, Kirk, you've been triggered, you're in a bad mood. All your thoughts are irrational and not the truth. All your thinking, all your emotions, all your conclusions are going to just be whisked away as soon as you return to balance with your wife. So do not regard these stupid thoughts that are running through your head. They're not regardable.
Well, it's like the way you orient your class up front, first meeting.
Yeah, exactly. You pound it into their heads. So with, did we talk about that this episode?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. We're getting our episodes messed up because we recorded 2 episodes. And anyway, so so in that, for you can say, okay, when I feel like I'm shutting down, it's because I'm afraid of failure or shame or making the wrong choice or being punished or something.
Right.
And here is what I say in that situation to myself and to other people. Like, I'm sorry, my brain is shutting down. I'm overwhelmed. Give me 5 minutes. Or, or I'm sorry if it looks like I'm shutting down. Or I'm ignoring you. I'm actually not. I'm actually just kind of overwhelmed, and give me a second. There's a phrase you say, and it releases you from any ongoing embarrassment, right? Because that can compound it. If you're trying to appear decisive while your brain is shutting down, and you are avoiding saying you're overwhelmed because you don't want to be outed in that way, that causes more anxiety and more shutdown. So if you just say, I'm overwhelmed and my brain is shutting, especially if it's someone you love, just tell them up front, this is what happens to me.
Yeah. And
then when you shut down, you'd be like, I'm shutting down. I'm not ignoring you, or I'm not just uncaring about the situation. I'm actually, highly triggered right now.
Yeah.
Not by you, but just by the situation.
People get triggered.
Yeah. Now the long term, or the more kind of therapeutic cure is the 2 pillars that I always talk about: awareness and corrective experiences. So awareness of the trigger, awareness of emotional regulation, awareness of automatic thoughts, all that kind of stuff. And then corrective experiences, it's hard to say what you need to have as far as a corrective experience, but I'm guessing that you were traumatized for taking action or being in the world or something.
Oh, right.
And if you are allowed to make mistakes or to take bold action or risks or be yourself or something in the face of an authority or someone that you love who doesn't punish you and even celebrates your ability to have agency, then over time with awareness and corrective experiences, you won't have this fight or freeze situation under those circumstances. That's the long-term look at it. Okay.
Good answer.
So let's do an OPP and then adjourn. What do you say?
Yeah, sure.
So these people became patrons all the way back in 2021.
Wow.
They are all monthly deserving listeners. We have Wooney from Honolulu, Hawaii.
Wow.
We have Melanie from Georgia. We have Jasmine from Issaquah, where I grew up.
Right on.
We have Sienna from Kensington, Maryland. We have Colette, who I think I have communicated with before, from Las Vegas, Nevada. We have Anna Maria from London. We have Anita from Great Britain. We have Kelsey from Marathon, Florida. I didn't know there's a Marathon, Florida. Olivia from Minneapolis, Minnesota. Michael from Monterey Park, California. Sarah from Montreal, Quebec. We have Tarizat from Naperville, Illinois.
Wow.
Sam from Northborough, Mass. Jackie from Olympia, Washington. Good old Olympia. We have SSSSSS from Oregon City, Oregon.
Wow. And
we have Nicole from Orlando, Florida. Thank you so much for becoming a patron and staying a patron for so long. It's been, if you're still a patron, you know, some people might not be patrons anymore, but if they are, thank you so much for being a patron for almost 3 years, which is really awesome, because when you do that, it gives us the money so that we can yammer into these microphones. All right, well, that does it for that episode. Everyone, please take care of yourself, because
you deserve it.